Hi there, I'm Tim Davis. I'm the Democratic candidate for United States Congress for the 7th Congressional District of Missouri. Thanks for joining me today. If you're new to this video series and aren't sure whether you live in the 7th District, it takes in basically all of southwest Missouri, stretching from Bolivar over to Joplin and down to Branson. Today, I'm going to be talking about the federal deficit, not for the purpose of lamenting the direction of our country, but because I'm optimistic about our country's future and I understand the direction we need to go. Where is that? Well, we need to balance the federal budget, and we can. The federal budget has posed a problem and is a burden now because it tends to destroy jobs. It makes our manufacturers less competitive. It crowds out private investment. At the same time, it imposes an interest burden, a debt burden on our children, such that there's a very real risk that young people born today will have a lower standard of living than their parents. And that's not what we want. It's not acceptable. But on the bright side, there's something we can do about it. And here's what. We need to control spending, and at the same time, we need to boost the rate of economic growth that will generate the tax revenues that we need to fund the deficit, not to fund the deficit, but to fund federal spending going forward. In terms of bringing spending under control, the general suspects that are brought up in the media and elsewhere tend not to be that important. If people talk about earmarks, it really doesn't matter that much. Earmarks account for only 1.5% of total federal spending. At the same time, discretionary spending tends to be very flat. It hasn't risen much in the past 30 years. The thing that's really driving the federal deficit is spending on entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. If you look at the next slide with me, I'll show you how that is. The next slide shows the rise in federal spending over the past 20 years, from, in inflation-adjusted dollars, $2 trillion in 1990 to about $4 trillion today. There is some bump up in spending over the last 2 years because of the bailout and the stimulus, but even if we took those particular bills away, federal spending would still be rising, and again, this is because of entitlements. It's not because of discretionary spending. The next slide illustrates the spending on entitlements. The dark gray circle shows a official federal budget deficit of about $13 trillion. By comparison, unfunded liabilities for Social Security are $7.7 trillion. Unfunded liabilities for Medicare are almost $38 trillion. You say, well, why is it that our entitlements are so much out of control? And this slide, the one I began with, shows why. These are two population pyramids, one from 1950, the other from 2010. In 1950, we had a large workforce and a very small pool of dependents, so entitlement spending wasn't that much. By contrast, today, the American population is much older. We have a moderate-sized workforce, but a much larger pool of dependents. This is generating the pressure on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and in turn, it's this pressure that drives federal spending and is driving the federal budget. If we can solve this demographic problem, the pressure on our federal budget goes away. So you ask, how can we solve the problem? Well, it's easy. We need to import capital, documented labor, and entrepreneurial ability. At the same time, we need to make modest reforms to entitlement programs. If we do these things, and they're very feasible, the United States will be able to balance its budget going forward. Here's why I'm optimistic about our country. We do have the ability to attract capital and labor. With immigration reform, especially to the H class of visas, that will allow American companies to bring in the workers, the documented workers that they need. By reducing the corporate tax rate to 20%, making us competitive with other OECD countries. The United States has the best game in town. This is important to remember, and here's why. The United States has a secure environment to live in. The United States does a great job protecting private property. We have a sophisticated legal system, in fact, the most stable and predictable system of commercial law of any country in the world. We have reliable sources of energy. We have a great infrastructure, a fantastic transport system. We have a dynamic market for ideas, a well-educated population. And, if that wasn't enough, the United States is a great place to live. We enjoy clean air, clean water, a vast national park system. We have many attractive public places. All of those things make people want to come to the United States, and they'll pay us for the privilege to do so. People will pay us to come to the United States, work here up until age 60 or 65, and then they'll leave voluntarily before they move into the pool of dependents. And again, this can be accomplished through minor adjustments to our immigration structure, especially to the age class of visas. In terms of entitlement reform, which I mentioned earlier, if we were to delay retirement by 1 month per year for the next 36 years, if we were to index Social Security benefits by the Consumer Price Index instead of the Wage Price Index, these small changes cumulatively will have a great effect, allow us to balance the federal budget. We won't face the looming deficit crisis that so many people are predicting. Well, I'm glad you've joined me today. That was a lot to think about. I hope you'll come back for the next videos in this series. Again, I'm Tim Davis, the Democratic candidate for United States Congress for the 7th District of Missouri. Talk to you soon, and goodbye.